right, let's finish this. Oh my gosh. What happened? Oh my Lord. You can see all of my things. I don't even know how that happened. IT, man. So I'm just going to talk, and we're going to hope that this works. Sweet. Okay, this talk is called Rebooting Culture. I don't know if that's a great title or not, but I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about some quotes about management I thought would be a good way to like break the ice a little bit. So there's a good quote by a person named Katie Stengel. The key to being a good manager is keeping the people who hate you away from those who are still undecided. Very true. On a more serious note, Dwight Eisenhower said, "You do not lead by hitting people over the head. That's assault, not leadership." I sort of wish that I had maybe known that earlier in my career. So usually I don't do a lot of talking about myself in these talks because I feel kind of weird when I do that. But this is really a talk about a bunch of things that I learned very specifically, personally, running and growing a team. And so I figured I would spend a little bit of time talking about myself. I am, like most of you, an engineer. I spent many, many, many years as an individual contributor. There is someone in the audience, I think he's still here, Steve Hayes is here in this audience. So I just got to meet him. But I have known Steve for a long time because I credit him in part to saving tech for me. When I left graduate school, I was really like, I don't know if I can be an effective engineer. Like, I just don't know how to get things done. I feel like I just keep hitting these walls. And I went to work for this little company called Goldman Sachs that I had never heard of, but the recruiter told me I had better not tell them that. So I went to work for this little company called Goldman Sachs, and I worked on this project that was in risk analysis. And this project was done in a style called XP, extreme programming, right? It's sort of agile, early agile days. And that had actually been introduced by Steve. So there were all these logins to test databases with his user ID, even when I got there, and I don't think he was there anymore at that time. And I learned in that time how to get work done. Like, I came and I was like, wow, so you write tests so you can check whether your work actually works, and you deploy to production every week. I had worked for Microsoft before that, where it's like every 5 years, if you're lucky, something goes out into the world. All of a sudden, I knew how to get work done. So I want to give Steve like a very special thank you, because I think that really saved tech for me. So fast forward, I was a tech lead, like many, many of you. I was a manager to small teams, but I was mostly an individual contributor. I did a lot of big architecture projects, a lot of distributed systems. I worked on the Apache ZooKeeper project. And I thought that I wanted to be a tech lead architect type. And then I kind of realized, I kind of hit this ceiling, and I was like, wow, it's really hard to have the kind of impact that I want to have when I don't have a team. I don't have a big team around me, right? I could see these people who are much worse engineers than me. They're like business jerks, and they have all these people reporting to them, and they can get so much more done than I can. So I left Goldman Sachs after many happy years. I had a really great time there. And I went to a little startup called Rent the Runway. So Rent the Runway is an American startup. They rent designer dresses and accessories. I am not a co-founder of Rent the Runway, and I did not start there as the CTO or VP of engineering or anything like that. I started as a director of engineering. I started as the director of infrastructure engineering, to be specific, because Rent the Runway was doing this big rewrite. They had this ugly legacy Drupal PHP monolith that was totally unsuitable to what we needed to do. And so I was there to lead the rewrite into microservices. And I can tell you all about that, but I won't. So I led that rewrite, and everything was okay. And it was a little stressful, but I was learning, I was growing, I gathered a team. I had a VP of engineering who I was working for that I liked. And then, to give you a little sense of my personality, this was on the column by my desk. It was a big open office, there's not many walls. So the column by my desk had this poster up. This is basically what I'm kind of like to work for as an architect manager. So this talk is going to make some sense pretty soon. Okay, great. Writing a bunch of code, leading and growing a team. And what happens? Well, a few months into it, about 9 months in, we have what I would call a cultural seg fault. And that's why this talk is called Rebooting Culture. We had a cultural seg fault where the person who had hired me, the then VP of engineering, left the team. And there was no real clear succession plan. There was no one obvious to take his place. A lot of people that he had hired were very at risk of leaving, and in fact, a lot of them did leave. And so I raised my hand and I said, put me in, boss. This is why I'm at a startup. I can do this. I can run this team. It's no big deal. It's like 15 or so developers, less than 20 developers at the time. I can totally do this. And the CEO was like, I don't know. Well, you can be the interim head of tech, okay? How about that? Because we need to have someone doing this. So I took the job. And I thought it would be okay, right? I'm super charming. I'm super smart, right? Like, I know how to write code really, really well. That's got to count for something. I didn't know anything about being an executive. And I really didn't know all that much about management. I knew some, but not as much as I thought I did. So 4 months in, I get my first review from the CEO. So she sits me down, and I'm sure she said some good things. I'm sure she did. But the only thing I remember from this review was that she told me that I had created a culture of fear. That's right. I had created a culture of fear on my engineering team. Let me tell you, that is not a message that you want to hear, right? Especially when you care about the people who work for you and you're trying your best. You don't want to hear that you created a culture of fear. So for me, this was a horrible thing to hear, but it was also a wake-up call. It was a wake-up call for me to realize that I needed to figure out how to lead people, not assault them, right? Not beat them over the head. How to actually help my team gel and be accomplished and enjoy coming to work every day, because otherwise they were all going to quit and we weren't going to ship, and the company was not going to be able to be successful if I couldn't figure out how to do this. So this talk is about the things that I learned in the 3-year period following that, where I worked very, very hard to move that culture away from fear and towards trust. And I emphasize that it took 3 years. Even though the change was not a massive change, these things, unfortunately, take a long time. These time cycles of improving people's impressions of you are not, fast. It's not a fast feedback loop. It's not a red-green refactor. So this is what I learned over 3 years. These are some of the highlights. The first one is the easy one to talk to about engineers. It is speed. So remember how I told you that Steve Hayes saved engineering for me, that I went to Goldman Sachs and I was releasing code every week and it was awesome? Releasing code a lot is really important, right? And helping your engineers work fast and work on what they do best every day is one of the best things that you can do for your team. So when I joined Rent the Runway, they were probably not releasing that frequently. And as I mentioned, we did this big rewrite into services. And in fact, I have a talk online about that if you are interested in that topic. But we did this big rewrite, and as with all rewrites, we screwed up some things. In particular, and you don't even need to read the text on here because it doesn't matter, but this was kind of like the dependency graph of stuff for releasing the storefront, which was the sort of Ruby forward layer. And so we had these Java services, and Ruby would call these APIs and glue JSON together and serve up assets and yada yada. Okay, and we had tried to architect for failure tolerance. Whew, bad idea. And so we had this really complicated thing where we had these Git submodules. Are Git submodules ever a good idea? I'm not sure I've ever literally heard anyone say, oh yes, Git submodules will solve that problem well. But I didn't know any better. I can barely use Git. So we had a lot of problems here. We were trying to deploy across multi-cloud. Also, does anybody really know how to do multi-cloud? I'm still not convinced. It was a mess. And deployments, we were doing deployments once a week, but it took like 4 hours. It was a mess. So we sent a team away and said, let's make this process faster. And they got rid of those Git submodules, and they added automation. And like a little while into that process, I turned to the team and I said, how about we not only make it so that we can deploy faster, but that we deploy every day, just every day, not continuous deployment, but just every day. And they said, sure, boss, we can do that. So put in some feature flagging, changed some processes, and we made it so that we could release that storefront code base every day and started doing that. And the result was immediate improvement in the values and attitude of the team. They were immediately happier. Engineers like to ship. especially engineers at startups. They like to get things done. People like to be able to say every day that they got to work on something tangible, that they got to do what they do best, right? They want to be able to say that. And when you have processes that slow them down from doing that, whether it's build or release or QA processes or whatever, they start to be upset. In particular, what I learned from this is that you really want to avoid creating unnecessary resource constraints, unnecessary us versus them. If you have scarcity anywhere in your pipeline, what happens is people compete, even when they love each other, even when they want to all be doing the right thing. We're all familiar with this. Anyone who's done a weekly deployment, I'm gonna guess, is familiar with the following story. I'm ready to cut the release branch. Can you just wait 15 minutes? I just gotta finish this one thing. All right, fine. 30 minutes later, okay, it's in. Oh, wait, but the tests are broken. Now I have to go fix the tests. You know, an hour later, okay, fine. We finally got something ready. We can finally release, right? So if you've got even a fast release process, that once a week thing turns into this constant negotiation because you've got this scarce resource that everyone wants, which is the resource of getting stuff off of their plate, of getting things marked as done. So my advice to all of you here, the lesson that I learned from this is not go in and do a really complex continuous deployment pipelines. I actually think that you get a lot of value from once a week, and it's up to you to do the analysis or once a day rather. It's up to you to do the analysis to determine whether more often than that would be a good idea. But generally speaking, be impatient. For the sake of your teams, be impatient about processes that are slow and things that become technical bottlenecks that slow people down, right? Impatience is one of my favorite personal characteristics. I am an impatient person, and so I think it's a good thing, clearly. And I don't mean be impatient with one another interpersonally. I mean be impatient with tasks that seem like they take too long. How can you make those tasks faster, right? Even if you're not a manager of a lot of people, if you've got tasks that seem slow, think about how you can make them faster, how you can remove those bottlenecks from your team. All right, point number 2. So I don't know if this should be called structure or not because people get really squirrely about the concept of structure. Some people like structure. A lot of people feel like it's really awful, particularly startup people. So there was a survey that I read recently where a bunch of people are doing some research on process and structure in startups, and they interviewed startup folks about this. And the words that they used to describe structure were things like slow, unnecessary, innovation crushing. That's a good one. So I'm always a little reluctant to talk about structure. Maybe what I mean is learning or perhaps transparency, because these are really the important things. The thing about structure is that it just is. If I were to give you 50,000 lines of spaghetti code and say, make it so that a team of developers can work on this code, you would add structure in some way. Maybe you would refactor it. Maybe you would add tests. You would do something to add structure, because structure is what helps you get context quickly. Good structure helps you get context quickly, right? Complex systems, successful complex systems tend to be built out of a bunch of simple systems that are kind of put together in some kind of structure. So in my opinion, good structure helps you answer the question, what should I be doing? In a way that's very fast, right? It just provides those guardrails for like, oh yeah, I need to be thinking about this, and I don't need to worry about inventing the universe to bake an apple pie. So what does this have to do with transparency and learning? Well, I believe that all structure actually comes out of learning, whether or not you realize it. Very, very rarely does structure get imposed for no reason at all. It might seem that way, especially if there's no transparency in the structure, especially if it's a structure that has existed for a really long time. But usually structure comes about because something happened, something good, something bad, something changed, and someone said, we are not doing as well with this as we could be. Let's figure out a way to sort of encode some things that we're having to figure out every single time we try this exercise so that we don't have to figure those things out every time. We can just like focus, right? We don't have to think about how in the world do we hire a person. We just have an HR structure that, here's the steps that you go through and this is how hiring happens, right? If you're at a startup, you don't even have that. You don't have any of the structure, right? But transparency is important because if you don't understand where that structure came from, if you don't really know what lessons that structure is built on, you are going to constantly question its value, right? Why do we have this? Is this necessary? I don't understand where this structure came from. Structure, I think, for the most part, comes from failure. It's a learning from failure, right? Structure is a sign that you are learning and growing. This is a famous structural failure, the Tacoma Narrows Bridge in the United States. It was a structure that failed. It stood for about 40 days and, died, I believe, due to wind shear, right? They didn't account for some variables. It's pretty rare to see structural engineering failures, so it's always interesting to see them, but okay, so it failed. So a lot of times, developers and engineers, when faced with a failing structure, say, let's just get rid of it. We don't need that. Why do we need this structure? Why do we need this process? And if you did that, then what would you do? I guess it's the Pacific Northwest. They could have, kayaked across the river, right? That's what they do in the Pacific Northwest. They're very outdoorsy out there, in case you weren't familiar. No, but what they did was they learned from that failure, and they built a better structure, a structure that is still standing today. So I learned from structural failure. I learned from structural failure when I created the Rent the Runway engineering career ladders. So some of you have probably heard of this. If you haven't, you can Google them. I shared those ladders publicly. This is the job ladder, level 1, level 2, senior, yada, yada, yada. But that came from failure. The first failure was that we had nothing at all. And so we had a bunch of engineers, and they had random titles, and they were paid random amounts of money. And we were hiring people and paying them random amounts of money and giving them random titles. And it was kind of an HR mess. So the HR team said, make a ladder. Make some career levels, and we're going to find some pay bands that make sense for that. And I said, cool, I can totally do that. And so I created V1 of the engineering ladder. And this is just a snippet of it, OK? So the D&D traits, awesome. I take no credit for that. That's actually from Foursquare. But very lightweight, very low detail. I did this by myself. Actually, this is based on the Foursquare engineering ladder at the time because I'm good friends with their former head of engineering. Rolled it out, gave it to everyone, and everyone was super stressed out because they saw this and they were like, I don't understand why I'm in the level that I'm in. I don't understand how I get to the next level. My goal in creating this sort of vague ladder was to make people less stressed out, and instead I made them way more stressed out. So Kate wanted to be called out 4 times. Here's your 4th call out. Kate said in her talk last year on interviewing, ambiguity is a bias vector, and she's right. When you have these ambiguous structures like this, when you have these ambiguous processes, people feel really uncomfortable because they don't know how you're going to interpret them. So I went away with a team of senior engineers from the company, and I looked at a bunch of more examples, and we got together and we created the ladder that I have published publicly, and I'm not going to leave this on the screen because it's too many words and you're going to try to read it. Don't read it. You can Google it later. You can find all of those words and more. And we created a structure that was transparent, that was much more transparent, right? It's still not perfect. It's hard to create a perfect structure. You're probably not going to do it. But it was far more transparent, and it had been created in a transparent way with my senior engineering team. I didn't just go off and do it alone, right? So failure and learning and transparency, these are what help you create strong structures. What does that mean for all of you as leaders, as tech leads, as lead developers, as budding managers, whatever role you are in? So the first thing that I want to encourage you to do is, if you're not doing them already, read up on learning reviews. Learning review is the new term for blameless postmortem, and I'm trying to give it a nudge because I think it's a good term, right? When things fail, particularly in production, hopefully we've all realized there are very rarely single root causes. There are usually many root causes of failure, right? Even when you mistype something, why were you having to type it in the first place, right? There are so many complex, nuanced causes of failure that people have started really figuring out that instead of I'm going to blame Mary for her screw up, she fat-fingered, that command, and she should be fired because, that took the servers down. Instead saying, okay, let's do a learning review, let's get the facts on the ground, and let's think about all the causes that caused this failure and what we can learn from them, right? This is your opportunity. This retrospectives, other types of meetings and experiences where you see something has failed in particular, interrogate the structures around that failure. Sometimes what you need to do is remove structure. Sometimes you need to change structure or modify structure. One thing I will advise you on is that structure is really for helping people figure out what to do, not detailed, precise instructions on how to do it. If you can write really precise instructions on how to do something, ask yourself whether you can't just automate that. Because telling people exactly how to do things is micromanaging. And humans are not very good at following really precise instructions, in case you have not noticed, right? So when you see a process that's more about how than about what, ask yourself, what can we automate? What can we put in the software or systems around this process that make it so that people know what they need to do and they don't have to worry about the really, really detailed bits of how to do it, especially if it's something that is very error-prone. Okay, so fine. So those are both like pretty, relatively technical, things that engineers can appreciate. Even if you don't like structure, you can appreciate the value of structures and processes. You probably do some of them. But relatedness is now we're going to get in the touchy-feelies. And this is really important, actually, because relatedness is a feeling of belonging, a feeling like you're part of a group, like you're part of a team, right? And relatedness is really important to making teams be effective, it turns out. Who knew? When I was an individual contributor, I was the queen of efficiency over relatedness. I would go to work, I would work for 4 hours, I would go to the gym, I would work out alone because working out with other people is horrible. I'd pretend no one was there. Then I would come back to work, I would eat lunch at my desk, I would work for another 4 hours, and I would go home. I did not do a lot of lunches, I did not do a lot of coffees. I was effective and efficient, but only because, for the most part, my role at that time did not encompass a large number of people, right? My effectiveness was mostly bound up in the technical quality that I was producing, and I had enough chances to interact face-to-face and over the phone and interact with the people that I needed to work with to get my job done, that we still managed to form enough relatedness, right? We knew who each other were. But when I became a manager, that business-only sense that I had was very, very harmful, right? I treated meetings, I treated one-on-ones like, oh, give me a status update. I don't have time to chit-chat with you. Like, let's just get this done. And that really undercut people's feeling like they could tell me things. And vulnerability, it turns out, is pretty important in creating successful and healthy teams. So vulnerability, right? Vulnerability is that willingness to take risks, that willingness to make mistakes, to ask questions. Culture of fear is something where people are really afraid to take risks and make mistakes and ask questions in front of you, right? That's what fear is. Vulnerability is the opposite of that. It's an environment where you feel really comfortable just giving it your all, going to failure, going beyond failure, and being like, well, what did we learn from that? The diagram on the right here is from Google. And whatever you think about Google's approach to building teams, they do a lot of research on the teams that they have. And I really appreciate that they do this. And what they learned when they were researching their most effective teams was that something that probably many Googlers don't care that much about was actually the most important sign of a healthy team, which was psychological safety, right? The ability for the people on this team to engage with one another, to feel safe in front of one another, to make mistakes and ask questions. The triangle on the left here is from the 5 dysfunctions of a team. It's a pretty famous management-y, leadership-y fable thing. That's an amusing read. And the very baseline dysfunction here is absence of trust. What is absence of trust? Absence of trust is not the trust that you're going to show up every day and write code. You're going to do your job. That's not the trust we're talking about here. This trust is the trust that even when you do things I don't agree with, when you say things I don't agree with, when I don't understand why you're doing what you're doing, I trust that you are trying to do your best, that we are all in this together, that this isn't a political maneuvering, that you're not trying to undermine me, that you're not trying to threaten me, that we are all on this team trying to move in the same direction. And when I don't understand why you're doing something, or I don't understand your perspective, there's something for me to learn. It's not a threat, it's a chance for learning. How do you build up vulnerability? Well, step 1 is learning how to apologize. And many people are very bad at this. How do you apologize? You do not apologize by saying, I'm sorry you feel that way. That is not an apology. That's a really bad thing to say to someone who is upset about something that you have done. The way to apologize is to say, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I failed, I screwed that up. I'm sorry that what my actions had consequences that I may or may not have predicted, and that I feel bad about that, right? Guilt is actually an okay emotion. It is okay to feel guilt. And the best thing to do with guilt is to apologize, is to admit that guilt and apologize cleanly, succinctly as you can, and move on from it. Because what happens when you don't admit those feelings of guilt, when you swallow those feelings of guilt, is if they turn into shame. Shame is, I am a screw up. I am a failure. I am a mistake. And shame is a terrible, toxic thing to feel. When you feel shame, it's hard to connect with people. It's hard to see people's intentions as good when you're loathing, when you've got this loathing going on inside of you. As a leader, even if you're not the CTO, even if you're not like the grand poobah of the team, you are all here because you're in leadership positions. So please practice apologizing. Practice showing people that when you screw up, you are a big enough person to apologize for it and admit it. Because what you're showing them is that it's okay to screw up, that it's not shameful. And that is really key to building strong teams that are able to be vulnerable in front of one another. The other thing that you have to your disposal, hopefully many of you, is your one-on-ones. So I believe that Rands gave his vegetables talk this morning. I have seen it. I was not here this morning. And he talks about one-on-ones. And one-on-ones are really important. And even if you're not a manager, I hope that you take time to engage with people one-on-one in any kind of leadership position. Don't do what I was doing in the beginning with my one-on-ones, where I was just all business, right? Tell me what your status is. Let's go. Let's talk about problems. Let's get to the intellectual meat. I really like that. I enjoy that. That's the way that I actually enjoy engaging with people. But when I started leaving a little room at the beginning to ask people how they were, how's your day? How was your weekend? How's that vacation planning going? Getting to know them as human beings, right? Getting to know about their spouse or their children or their pets or their hobbies or whatever, right? You don't need to pry and you don't have to be best friends, but you should care about them as humans. And believe it or not, all you have to do is start asking the questions and listening to the answers, and you will start to care about them. You can actually care about people more just by pretending to care about them more. Believe it or not, it will actually start, it really works. Try it. So this is a picture of me with my going away gift from Rent the Runway. It's a very large fitness hammer, weighs about 15 pounds unweighted. And my nickname on the team, one of my nicknames, was the Hammer. I had even worse nicknames apparently. Not vulgar, but violent. So one of my nicknames was the Hammer. I am clearly a decisive person. I'm a person who's willing to come into a debate and really strongly state a position and shut down conversation as needed. I try not to do that, right? But I can do that, right? I will be the alpha geek if I need to. I have done that before, and I will almost certainly do it again at some point. Which brings us to conflict. Right, so conflict. We're getting towards the end of this, and this is awesome. I've done a really fast job, which is good because we all are feeling tired, right? But conflict, how do you feel about conflict? Some of you probably like conflict. You enjoy argument, you enjoy debate, and some of you probably hate conflict, and you really, really don't like it when you have to argue with people. And both of those are totally fine ways to be. I like conflict, but I appreciate that not everybody is like me. But here's the thing, no matter whether you like conflict or fear conflict, you need to have healthy conflict on your teams because conflict is what draws out opinions and data. You need to hear what people are thinking. It is important that you provide environments where people can express their opinions and you can sort of debate and discuss details, right? And if you have a fear of conflict and a fear of you can't say anything negative unless you have a solution, right? No criticisms if you don't come up with a solution. That's a terrible thing to say to someone. If you have someone on your team who is too negative and they keep coming up to you with criticisms, here's my advice. Instead of making them have a solution, make them really clearly articulate their criticism. Be really specific. It's not enough to say, that database sucks, or that service sucks, or this process is crappy. Say, no, be really specific with me. Why does it suck? What are the things about it that you don't like? Because not everyone's gonna have a solution. But they are doing you a favor and being honest and telling you something that they don't feel great about. But if you love conflict like I do, or you hate conflict, I advise either way to replace the fears or love of conflict with curiosity. Because when you are in that alpha position, as it were, when you are in a leadership position and you are really aggressive with conflict, that can shut people down. Even if you don't mean it, it shuts people down. You are the loudest voice in the room. They are listening to you more closely than anyone else. So instead of being super aggressive with conflict, ask questions. Try to detect times when you disagree with someone, and instead of saying, no, that's totally wrong, what are you talking about, I disagree with you, try to ask them, why? What are you thinking about that? Can you explain more your reasoning behind that? Why do you think we should do this, right? Replace that with curiosity. If you hate conflict, this also works, because this gives you a way to get those opinions out without getting into arguments, hopefully. And that brings us to meetings, because meetings are where a fear of conflict and inability to have honest conversations shows up. If you have a bunch of boring meetings, you don't have enough conflict, or healthy conflict, right? Boring meetings are terrible. We work together as teams because as teams we are better than individuals, but we have to communicate with one another to work effectively as teams. So a lot of people think that because meetings are boring, you should make them super efficient, script them in these really precise ways, not have them at all. I don't think any of those solutions is going to work to solve the problem, right? You need to meet. Meetings are high bandwidth communication opportunities, right? We just heard about how it's kind of annoying when you're on a conference call with someone and they're driving and you hear horns honking, because you do deserve as much attention, even if it's only over the phone, when you're meeting with someone. But if your meetings are boring, you're not going to get that attention. Even when you're in the same room, people are going to be on their phones, they're going to be staring into space, they're going to be falling asleep, whatever, right? If a meeting consists of a group of people who have little to say until after the meeting, if this quote sums up your meeting culture at work, you have a problem. And I encourage all of you as leaders, right, whatever level of leadership you are, be less tolerant of these boring meetings, but don't abandon them. Don't just say, because I am bored with meetings, I'm not going to go to them. Sometimes that's the right answer. There are some meetings that don't need to happen. But for other meetings, retrospectives perhaps, right? Important meetings where your group should be getting together and sharing ideas and feelings, you as the leader can pull those feelings out of people, pull those opinions out, make space to let people talk to one another. If people are talking about something that's not perfectly on the agenda and enough of the room is engaged, don't just say, oh, let's take that offline, right? That is a really crappy way to shut people down. If enough people in the room want to talk about something, you may need to talk about that, right? That may be a good thing to talk about. I just think that boring meetings are one of the signs of like teams that just have not quite figured out how to really be honest and open and gelled with one another. And that's why this is the, sort of end game of creating relatedness and vulnerability, is having groups that you enjoy interacting with. So, summary. I'm going to get a drink of water that you can read. No. Move fast, right? You can do this. You can definitely make things go faster. So just be really diligent about looking where you can make things faster. Be transparent and learn from your structures and from your failures. Practice relating to your colleagues as humans, and don't settle for an environment where you can't ask questions, right? At work, is my opinion something that people listen to? You deserve to say yes to that. If we are willing to stand fully in our own shoes and never give up on ourselves, then we will be able to put ourselves in the shoes of others and never give up on them. There's a quote by Pema Chodron. She's a Buddhist nun who does a bunch of amazing writing. I'm really a big fan of hers. And I say that because the way that you build empathy, number one, it really is, I'm telling you, just ask people how their lives are. And just ask the question. Empathy is a learnable skill, right? Asking people how they are, but also making time to know yourself, to feel your feels. Feel your feels. Feel the good ones and the bad ones. It's okay to have a full range of human emotions. The slide here is a snippet from Daniel Tiger. Daniel Tiger will be familiar to probably Americans with children. I don't know if that's made it across the pond or not. Daniel Tiger is an animated character. It's very annoying if you are an adult. But you know, Daniel Tiger, every episode, learns things that children need to learn to get along in the world. He learns about when he's angry, to take a breath, right? He learns about when he's frustrated, to ask for help. And he learns that empathy is remembering that other people have feelings too. And you deserve to feel your feelings, and other people deserve to feel their feelings, and just remember that everybody, we're all in this together. And the more kind we can be to ourselves, the more kind we're gonna be able to be to our teams. You can all do this. This is not out of reach. This is not rocket science. It just takes every day showing up for yourself and showing up for your team. And that is all. Thank you very much.